They sold the Apache girl as infertile. But what the rancher discovered changed everything. The morning was quiet when the rancher first heard about the deal. It was the kind of quiet that usually meant something was being hidden. The sun had barely risen over the dry hills, and the air carried the smell of dust and grass. He was fixing a broken fence when an old trader rode up slowly, as if unsure whether he should be there at all. The trader spoke in a low voice, careful with every word, and mentioned that a young Apache woman needed work. He said she was being sent away because she was infertile and therefore unwanted by her people. The word sounded wrong the moment it was spoken. The rancher did not respond immediately. He had lived long enough to know that when people explain too much, they are often lying. The trader explained that the woman would work on the ranch in exchange for food, shelter, and a small payment sent back to those who brought her. He tried to make it sound normal, almost routine. He said these things happened all the time, that it was better for everyone involved. The rancher listened without interrupting, but something inside him tightened. He had hired workers before, men and women from difficult backgrounds, but this felt different. The trader avoided eye contact, kept adjusting his hat, and spoke as if he wanted to leave quickly. When the woman arrived later that day, the rancher saw immediately that the story did not match reality. She was young, much younger than he expected. Her movements were careful, almost controlled, as if she had learned not to draw attention to herself. She carried a small bag that looked far too light to hold a person's life. Her eyes stayed low, not out of weakness, but out of caution. She did not look around with curiosity. She looked around as someone who had learned to measure danger. The trader introduced her briefly and repeated the same words again, calling her infertile as if it explained everything. The rancher nodded but said nothing. He noticed the way the woman's hands tightened when that word was used. Her face showed no reaction, but her body told a different story. When the trader finally left, dust rising behind his horse, the ranch felt heavier, as if something unseen had been left behind. The rancher showed her where she would sleep, a small clean room near the kitchen. He explained the basic rules slowly and clearly, making sure she understood. She listened closely, nodding at the right moments. Her English was simple but clear, better than he had expected. When he asked if she had questions, she shook her head. It was not the kind of answer that meant "I understand." It meant, "I have learned not to ask." That night, the rancher sat alone at his table, replaying the day in his mind. He told himself he was doing something good by giving her a safe place. Still, a quiet doubt stayed with him. He had accepted the trader's explanation too easily. He wondered why a young woman would be sent away so quietly, with so little concern for her future. He wondered who had decided her worth could be reduced to a single word. Over the next few days, the woman worked without complaint. She woke early, followed instructions carefully, and never wasted time. She did more than asked, but never enough to draw attention. The rancher noticed how she flinched at sudden loud sounds, how she froze when unfamiliar men visited the ranch. These were not signs of illness. These were signs of fear learned over time. People in the nearby town began to talk, as they always did. Some said the rancher was kind to take her in. Others said he was foolish. A few repeated the same label they had heard, using it as an excuse not to care. No one asked who decided such things. No one questioned whether the story was true. The rancher listened but did not join the conversations. He felt a growing discomfort every time the word was used so casually. One afternoon, while fixing tools in the shed, the rancher noticed a small bundle fall from the woman's pocket. She rushed to pick it up, her face pale with fear, as if she expected punishment. He apologized and turned away, pretending not to notice. Later, when he was alone, he realized the bundle had been medical papers, old and folded many times. He did not read them, but the sight stayed with him. Why would someone sent away for being infertile carry such papers so carefully? That night, he heard her crying softly, trying to keep the sound from escaping her room. It was not loud, not dramatic. It was quiet, controlled, and full of exhaustion. The rancher stood in the hallway, unsure what to do. He knew comfort offered at the wrong time could feel like another kind of harm. He went back to his room, but sleep did not come easily. As days turned into a week, small moments began to change the space between them. He spoke to her more during meals, asking simple questions about the work, the weather, the horses. She answered politely, never sharing more than necessary. But sometimes when she thought he was not looking, her guard slipped just a little. He saw intelligence, awareness, and something else he could not name yet. It was not weakness. It was endurance. The rancher began to realize that the story he had been told was not meant to explain her situation. It was meant to end questions. The label was not a fact. It was a tool. The idea disturbed him more than he expected. He had grown up believing that hard work and honesty mattered. Yet here was a system that used lies to quietly remove a person, and everyone acted as if it were normal. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, the rancher watched her feed the horses. She moved calmly, confidently, with knowledge that came from experience. There was no sign of someone broken or incapable. He felt a deep sense of unease, followed by guilt. By accepting the deal without questioning it, he had become part of something he did not yet fully understand. He told himself again that he was only providing work, that he was not responsible for what happened before she arrived. But the truth pressed harder each day. Silence, he began to understand, was not neutral. Silence allowed harm to continue. By the end of the first week, the rancher knew one thing for certain. The woman's presence on his ranch was not an accident, and her story was not complete. Whatever had been taken from her, it was more than a place among her people. It was her voice. And without realizing it, he was standing at the edge of a truth that would not stay buried for long. The second week on the ranch began quietly, but something had already changed. The woman no longer felt like a stranger moving through borrowed space. Her steps were still careful, her voice still soft, yet there was a steady rhythm to her days now. She knew where the tools were kept, which horse needed a gentler hand, and how long the bread should stay in the oven. The rancher noticed these things without meaning to. He also noticed that she never rested unless told to, as if stopping without permission was a risk she could not afford. Each morning, she rose before the sun. By the time the rancher came outside, the water buckets were filled and the animals were already fed. When he thanked her, she simply nodded. Praise did not seem to comfort her. It seemed to make her uneasy, as if kindness always came with a hidden cost. This troubled the rancher more than open anger would have. Slowly he began to speak to her more, not about her past, but about simple things. He talked about the weather, the condition of the land, and small repairs that needed to be done. He spoke calmly, without raising his voice. He made sure never to stand too close or surprise her from behind. These small choices were not planned. They came from instinct, from a growing awareness that trust was fragile. One afternoon, while repairing a fence together, the rancher noticed how quickly she understood his instructions. She adjusted the wire with skill, her hands moving with confidence. This was not the work of someone inexperienced or incapable. When he asked where she learned such things, she paused. For a moment he thought she would not answer. Then she said simply, "I learned by watching." Nothing more, no names, no places. At lunch she ate quietly, always finishing last. She watched others before taking more food, even when there was plenty. The rancher gently encouraged her to eat, assuring her there was enough. She listened, but old habits do not disappear easily. Hunger, he realized, leaves marks that cannot be seen. The rancher began to notice other details. She kept her few belongings neatly arranged, as if ready to leave at any moment. She startled when someone called her name too loudly. She avoided the main road when possible, choosing longer paths around the property. These were not signs of illness. These were signs of someone who had learned to stay unseen. One evening, a neighbor stopped by unexpectedly. The sound of another voice caused the woman to freeze where she stood. Her face lost color, and she stepped back without thinking. The rancher noticed immediately. He introduced the neighbor calmly and made sure the conversation stayed brief. After the man left, the woman apologized, though she had done nothing wrong. The apology came quickly, as if practiced. That night the rancher sat alone again, thinking. The label he had been given no longer made sense. If anything, it felt like a cover placed over something far more complicated. He wondered how many people had accepted that word without question, the same way he almost had. He wondered how many lives were quietly reshaped by simple lies. Days passed, and with them came small moments of connection. Sometimes she would ask about the horses, showing genuine interest. Sometimes she would comment on the sky or the changing season. These moments were brief but meaningful. The rancher responded patiently, careful not to push. He understood now that forcing conversation would only rebuild walls she was slowly lowering on her own. One afternoon, while sorting supplies, the rancher noticed her studying a map on the wall. She looked away when she realized he was watching. He asked if she had been anywhere on it. She shook her head. Then, after a pause, she pointed to a distant area and said quietly, "My mother talked about this place." It was the first time she had mentioned family. The rancher did not ask more. He simply nodded, letting the moment rest. The more he observed, the clearer it became that she carried heavy memories. Sometimes, when she thought she was alone, her expression changed. It was not sadness alone. It was a mix of strength and pain, as if she had been forced to grow up too fast. The rancher felt a growing responsibility, though he did not yet know what it meant. Town gossip continued, but it mattered less now. The rancher no longer listened. He was focused on what he saw with his own eyes, and what he saw did not match the story he had been sold. He began to feel anger, not loud or explosive, but deep and steady. Anger at a system that made lies easier than truth. Anger at himself for not questioning sooner. One evening during dinner, the woman hesitated before speaking. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she asked if she was doing her work correctly. The question caught the rancher off guard. He assured her that she was doing more than enough, that there were no complaints. She nodded, but the worry in her eyes did not fade. It was clear that approval had once been used as a weapon, given and taken away without reason. That night, the rancher made a quiet decision. He would learn the truth, not by forcing her to speak, but by paying attention. By listening when she chose to share, and by looking beyond words when she did not. He realized that truth does not always arrive as a confession. Sometimes it reveals itself through patterns, silences, and fear. A few days later, while cleaning the storage room together, the same bundle of papers fell from her pocket again. This time, she froze completely. Her hands shook as she picked them up. The rancher gently told her she did not have to explain anything. He turned away, giving her space, but inside his resolve hardened. Those papers mattered. They were not meaningless. By the end of the second week, something important had shifted. The woman still did not fully trust him, but she no longer looked at the ground every time he spoke. She met his eyes briefly now. She moved through the ranch with a little less tension in her shoulders. Small changes, but real ones. The rancher understood that whatever had been done to her was not only about one lie. It was about control, silence, and fear. And while he did not yet know how deep it went, he knew this much. The truth was there, waiting. And once uncovered, it would not be easy for anyone involved. As the sun set on another long day, the rancher stood by the fence, watching the land grow quiet. He realized that the woman who had arrived as part of a deal was not a burden, not a problem to be managed. She was a person whose story had been taken from her, and without planning to, he had stepped into that story. What he chose to do next would matter more than he ever imagined. By the third week, the ranch no longer felt like a place of temporary shelter. It felt like a place where questions were slowly waking up. The rancher could sense it in himself most of all. He found his thoughts returning again and again to the woman's quiet fear, to the paper she guarded so carefully, and to the story he had been told that no longer made sense. What troubled him most was not what he knew, but what he did not. He began to notice how careful she was whenever health or sickness was mentioned. When one of the ranch hands complained about a sore back, she grew silent. When the rancher talked about a doctor in town who treated animals and people alike, her body stiffened. She kept her face calm, but her hands told the truth. They trembled slightly, then clenched, as if she were holding something back. The rancher started to understand that fear like this did not come from nothing. It came from experience, from being judged, from being spoken about instead of spoken to. One morning, the rancher decided to visit the town doctor under the excuse of checking on an injured horse. He did not mention the woman by name. He only asked general questions about medical records and how often false claims appeared. The doctor, an older man with tired eyes, sighed deeply. He said it happened more often than people wanted to admit. Papers could be altered. Words could be twisted. If enough people agreed on a lie, it became easier to accept than the truth. The rancher left the clinic with a heavy feeling in his chest. He had not confirmed anything yet, but the door to the truth was opening wider. He realized that the woman's silence was not because she had nothing to say. It was because speaking had once cost her too much. Back at the ranch, he watched her from a distance as she worked. She was teaching one of the younger ranch hands how to calm a nervous horse, speaking softly, moving slowly. Her patience was remarkable. This was not someone who was broken or incapable. This was someone who had learned to survive by being observant and careful. That evening, the rancher decided to take a small risk. During dinner, he spoke gently about fairness and how lies could hurt people. He did not look at her directly when he said it. He did not ask questions. He simply spoke as if thinking out loud. The woman listened quietly. When he finished, there was a long pause. Then she said very softly, "Sometimes lies are easier for others." The words stayed with him long after the meal was over. A few days later, the rancher noticed her sitting alone by the fence at dusk. The sky was turning orange and purple, and the land was quiet. He approached slowly and sat a short distance away. They watched the horizon together in silence. After a while, he said he had once believed that staying out of other people's problems was the same as respecting them. Now he was not so sure. The woman did not respond right away. Then she said, "When no one speaks, the lie becomes strong." Her voice did not shake, but her eyes reflected something deep and old. The rancher realized this was the closest she had come to telling him the truth. That night, he could not sleep. He thought about the system that allowed people to decide another person's worth so easily. He thought about how labels could be used like chains, invisible but powerful. He also thought about his own role. Even with good intentions, he had accepted a lie because it was convenient. The next morning, he made another quiet decision. He would not confront her directly. He would gather facts first. Truth, he understood now, needed support to stand. Over the next several days, he began asking careful questions around town. Not about her, but about the people who had arranged the deal. He learned that the trader had a history of handling unwanted cases, always with simple explanations that discouraged curiosity. He learned that complaints had been made before, then quietly dismissed. Patterns began to form. Meanwhile, the woman grew more aware of his concern. She watched him closely now, measuring his actions. One afternoon, she finally spoke when they were alone in the barn. She said she did not want trouble. She said she only wanted to work and stay invisible. Her words were calm, but there was fear beneath them. The rancher told her she was not trouble. He said no one had the right to decide her value. He stopped there. He did not push further. but his words seemed to affect her. She looked at him for a long moment as if trying to decide whether to believe him. A few days later, something unexpected happened. The woman approached him on her own, holding the folded papers in her hands. She did not offer them. She only said they were important and that they had been used against her. That was all. The rancher did not ask to see them. He simply said that when she was ready, he would listen. That night, the rancher felt the weight of responsibility settle fully on his shoulders. This was no longer just a matter of curiosity. It was about justice, even if justice came quietly and slowly. He returned to the doctor, this time with the papers. He did not explain everything, only that he needed to know whether the documents were honest. The doctor examined them carefully. His expression changed. He pointed out errors, dates that did not match, notes that seemed copied rather than observed. He said without hesitation that the papers were unreliable. The truth, at last, had a shape. When the rancher returned, he did not rush to confront anyone. He sat with the knowledge, understanding how dangerous it could be if handled carelessly. He also understood why the woman had been afraid. The lie had not been an accident. It had been a decision. That evening, he told her gently that the papers did not reflect reality. He told her that what had been said about her was not true. She listened without reacting at first. Then her shoulders shook just slightly. She did not cry loudly. She simply lowered her head and breathed deeply as if something heavy had finally been set down. She did not thank him. Instead, she said, "They said no one would check." The sentence explained everything. In that moment, the rancher felt both anger and shame. Anger at those who had used lies to control her. Shame that the system had allowed it for so long. He realized that discovering the truth was only the beginning. What mattered now was what he would do with it. As the days passed, the ranch felt different again. The woman walked with a bit more confidence. She spoke a little more freely, though still carefully. The rancher knew the road ahead would not be easy. Truth had a way of unsettling people who benefited from lies, but one thing was clear. The story he had been sold was false. And once a lie is exposed, it can never fully regain its power. The truth had been buried, but it was alive. And now it was awake. After the truth came into the open, nothing felt simple anymore. The rancher woke each morning with a heavy sense of responsibility. Knowing the truth did not bring relief. Instead, it brought a new kind of pressure. He understood now that doing nothing would mean allowing the lie to live on. But speaking out would not be easy. The people who had created the lie were used to silence. They depended on it. The woman sensed the change in him. She watched his movements more closely, noticed how often he left the ranch and returned deep in thought. One evening, she told him quietly that he should stop asking questions. She said people who asked too much often paid a price. Her concern was not for herself alone. It was for him too. That worried him more than any threat could. The rancher assured her he would be careful. He promised he would not act without thinking. But inside, he knew that careful did not mean quiet. The truth had already changed him. He could not pretend otherwise. Word began to spread in town that the rancher was asking around. Some people avoided him. Others warned him in gentle ways, suggesting that old matters were better left alone. One man told him that the system existed for a reason, that challenging it would only bring trouble. The rancher listened politely, but his mind was already made up. A system that depended on lies did not deserve protection. The trader who had brought the woman to the ranch heard the rumors too. One afternoon, he appeared without warning. His smile was tight, his voice friendly but sharp underneath. He asked whether everything was satisfactory, whether the arrangement was still acceptable. The rancher looked at him calmly and said he had questions about the paperwork. The trader's smile faded. He laughed it off at first, calling it a misunderstanding. He said papers were only formalities, that everyone knew how things worked. But the rancher did not back down. He mentioned the doctor's opinion. He mentioned dates and errors. The trader's tone changed completely. He warned the rancher not to cause problems. He said it would not end well. After the trader left, the woman stood very still. She said this was what she feared. She said people like him did not forgive challenges. The rancher told her that fear was exactly why the lie had survived for so long. He said he would not let it decide their future. The next days were tense. Small things went wrong. Supplies arrived late. Neighbors who once waved now turned away. The rancher felt the pressure building, slow and steady. Still, he continued. He contacted a legal aid group known for handling quiet cases. He shared the documents, the doctor's findings, and his own account. They listened carefully and agreed that the matter was serious. The woman struggled with his decision. Some nights she barely slept. She told him that standing up would only bring more attention, more danger. She had learned that survival sometimes meant accepting injustice. The rancher listened, truly listened, but he did not change his course. He told her that survival without dignity was not real safety. A meeting was arranged with town officials. The rancher was advised to stay calm, to speak only to facts. The woman did not want to attend, but he made sure she had the choice. In the end, she agreed to be present, though she said very little. Her presence alone spoke volumes. The meeting was uncomfortable. Some officials avoided eye contact. Others defended the old explanations, saying mistakes happened, that intentions were misunderstood. The rancher presented the evidence quietly, without anger. The doctor's statement carried weight. So did the patterns that had been uncovered. Slowly, the room changed. Doubt entered where certainty once lived. Not everyone accepted it. Some accused the rancher of exaggerating. Some questioned his motives. Why now? Why her? He answered simply that truth did not have a schedule. When it appeared, it demanded attention. After the meeting, backlash followed. Anonymous notes appeared. Friends warned him again. The woman asked him one last time to stop. Her voice shook as she said she could live with the lie if it meant peace. The rancher looked at her and said peace built on fear was not peace at all. Days passed in uncertainty. Then, quietly, things began to shift. An official review was announced. The trader stopped coming around. The town doctor was asked to submit a formal statement. The lie was no longer protected by silence. It was exposed to light, and it weakened under scrutiny. Through it all, the rancher never pushed the woman to speak more than she wished. When she chose to share small parts of her experience, he listened without interruption. He never corrected her emotions or rushed her healing. He understood that reclaiming truth was not only about records and meetings, it was about restoring control. One evening she told him that for the first time she felt seen, not rescued, not pitied, seen. The words stayed with him. He realized that standing against what was considered normal had cost him comfort, but it had given her something far more valuable. By the end of that period, the outcome was clear. The false claims were officially questioned. The arrangements that had placed her on the ranch were declared improper. There would be consequences, though they might take time. The woman was no longer labeled by a lie. The rancher stood at the edge of his land one night, watching the stars. He knew the fight was not completely over. Systems rarely changed overnight, but something important had already happened. Silence had been broken. A truth had been spoken where none was allowed before. The woman joined him quietly. She did not say thank you. Instead, she said she felt lighter, as if a weight she had carried for years was finally loosening. The rancher nodded. He knew that what they had done mattered, not just for her, but for others whose stories were still hidden. Standing against what was always called normal had not been easy. It had cost peace, safety, and comfort. But it had also revealed something powerful. One person choosing to act could force a lie to answer for itself. And sometimes, that was enough to begin real change. The weeks that followed felt different, as if the land itself had taken a deep breath. Nothing dramatic happened overnight. There were no loud announcements or public celebrations. Instead, Change came quietly, in small but meaningful ways. The kind of change that lasts because it grows slowly. The official review moved forward. People who once avoided the topic now spoke carefully about it. Some admitted they had known parts of the truth but had chosen silence because it was easier. Others said they never thought one person could make a difference. The rancher listened to all of it without pride. He did not see himself as a hero. He saw himself as someone who had finally chosen not to look away. For the woman, the change was deeply personal. Without the false label hanging over her, she began to breathe differently. Her shoulders were no longer tense all the time. She slept through the night more often. She laughed once, suddenly, at something small, and then looked surprised by the sound of her own voice. It was the first time the rancher had heard her laugh. She was given the chance to decide her own future. No one rushed her. No one demanded answers. She could leave if she wished, return to her people, or stay where she was for a while longer. For the first time in a long time, the choice was hers alone. She chose to stay, at least for now. Not because she was afraid to leave, but because she wanted time to understand who she was without the weight of lies. The ranch had become a place of healing, not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. The rancher noticed that she began to speak more openly with others. She shared knowledge about animals and land that impressed even the most experienced workers. People started to see her not as a story or a rumor, but as a person with skill and insight. Respect replaced suspicion, slowly but surely. One afternoon, she told the rancher that she wanted to learn more, not just about ranch work, but about the world beyond it. He helped her find books and contacts. He encouraged her curiosity instead of fearing it. He understood now that real support meant opening doors, not guarding them. The town continued to adjust. The trader who had brought her was no longer welcome. His influence faded as questions followed him wherever he went. Others like him grew more cautious. They realized that lies could be challenged, that silence was no longer guaranteed. The rancher faced consequences too. Some friendships never recovered. Some doors closed quietly. But new respect took their place. People who valued honesty found their way to him. He learned that losing comfort was sometimes the price of gaining integrity. One evening, as the sun set over the open fields, the woman stood beside him and said she finally felt like her life belonged to her again. Not because everything was fixed, but because she was no longer defined by what others said about her. The rancher understood that this was the real ending of the story, not paperwork or meetings, but this moment of reclaiming self-worth. She eventually decided to leave the ranch, not in fear but in strength. She left with plans, with confidence, and with the knowledge that she could choose her own path. When she said goodbye, there were no dramatic words, only quiet gratitude and mutual respect. After she left, the rancher returned to his routines. The land was the same, the work never-ending, but he was not the same man. He paid closer attention now. He questioned stories that sounded too simple. He understood that real justice often begins with one uncomfortable question. The town remembered the case for a long time. It became a quiet reference point, a reminder that labels could be lies and that truth, once uncovered, could not be easily buried again. Other people came forward with questions of their own. Change continued, slow but steady. The rancher often thought about the first day she arrived, how close he had come to accepting the lie without thought. That realization stayed with him as both a warning and a lesson. Good intentions were not enough. Action mattered. What he discovered that day did change everything. It changed one woman's life by returning her voice. It changed a town by breaking a long silence. And it changed him by teaching him that doing the right thing was rarely easy, but always necessary. In the end, there was no grand ending, no loud victory. Just a truth restored, a life redirected, and a man who learned that seeing someone clearly could be the most powerful act of all.